the way this started was we had I was planning intern events, and we were for instance, last night we went to watch Batman at Blake Corcoran's house, and we were talking about like other events that we would do. And one of the things that we always talked about when we were talking about employee events was what it would feel like to actually go through a startup, because most of us, when we're doing a startup, you only get it from the day-to-day grind perspective. And when I started talking about that, one of the most colorful stories I knew, that I know of, is actually Charles here, who's the founder of Guitar Hero. I'm going to wait and let him tell you most of his stories. But his story is one of the most amazing startup stories I've heard in a long time. And so when we were talking about doing this, I mentioned it to Derek. And as we were, and the more I talked to Derek about it, we decided to make it much more of a community event instead of just instead of just a Rumpus event. And that's why I think the collection here, we have some folks that are working out of IO. We have a Stanford StartX Y Combinator company here, and obviously the guys at Gumroad. So trying to make it much more feel like a startup community rather than one company's perspective. And when we got that going, the momentum just kind of flowed, and I'm glad we're all here today to hear it. So with that, I'll just pass over to Derek, who's going to moderate for tonight.
Yeah, totally. Well, thanks for having us, and we've got some Start Grind people here as well, so we appreciate you guys having us. Let me just quickly introduce you guys. Anthony Soohoo is worked at a lot of different places, done a lot of different things. He's ex-Apple, ex-Yahoo, Ink2Me. He founded a company called DotSpotter that was purchased by CBS, where he then became the GM of their interactive business, and he's now the CEO and founder of Rumpus. Charles Huang is the founder and of the illustrious Red Octane, which was the makers of Guitar Hero, which was purchased by Activision in 2006. Right. Currently, he's the CEO of Green Throttle Games, and grateful to have you here. Sahil Lavingia is the CEO of Gumroad. He is one of the first employees at a small site called Pinterest. He also spent some time with Turntable FM, and Gumroad recently raised another $7 million or so. Is that right? Raised about $8 million to date, and so grateful to have you guys. So maybe we could start with you, Anthony, and just kind of talk. It's kind of interesting because we have these different phases of startups, right? So we have Sahil is kind of, their company is in some ways just getting going, and Charles is onto a new company, but he kind of took it the distance, and Anthony, you guys have just gotten going too here in the last few years. So talk to us a little. Let's go back to the beginning. Talk to us a little bit about why you became an entrepreneur, how it kind of all got started for you.
Well, I think early in my career I worked at places like Apple and Ink2Me, and the perspective I had was that I felt like in terms of running a company, I had a very limited view of what an organization would kind of look like, because when you're inside a larger organization, it's interesting. You work in product management. For instance, I was a product manager for the PowerBook line, the notebook line at Apple, and I did that one specific job on a day-to-day basis, product managing one product. But organizationally, as a whole, I didn't really get to see it. And I think that there was a strong curiosity and desire to kind of do that. And in addition to that, I always had ideas of companies that I wanted to start. And so it didn't seem like it was as good of a time as any to start my first company back in '99. And that's when I jumped in. Lo and behold, I didn't realize when we raised our Series A back then in March of 2000, that was the beginning of the end either. But that was an interesting ride. And I think the second company I started, DotSpotter, there was just an intention of, I had a desire after leaving Yahoo to start another company because, again, the frustration of working inside a large organization brought me back, and that's why I left and started a company again.
Great, thank you. Charles, how about you? When did you first, what was your first entrepreneurial endeavor? Why did you do it?
I think part of it, I come from a Chinese family of mostly entrepreneurs, not tech entrepreneurs, but people who are manufacturing and trading in Taiwan. And so sometimes I think it's drilled into you when you're a kid that someday you're going to run your own company, and so I think it was just a natural evolution. And like Anthony, we started our company in '99, which then was like everybody was doing a startup, because if people tell you there's a bubble today, it was nothing like it was in '99. '99 was 10x this.
It was so muted right now. Everyone says that this is the current bubble. You were in '99. It was so crazy.
Well, that's exactly what people are saying, right, Charles? Is that people say now everyone wants to start a company, but it's not anywhere near it was.
No, '99 was crazy. '99 was like every retail storefront was rented out to some startup because you couldn't find office space. Right? So you walked down University Avenue and people were taking stores. Like we bid on a place that was a Blockbuster store that we were trying to just convert into an office. People were like putting startups inside malls because they could get space. It was
and every billboard on 101 was completely where the guys would just get funded.
Yeah, and it was crazy. In those days, I used to say like, we raised a little bit of money also right before the bubble burst, and in those days, heck, literally, if you just had a PowerPoint, you get $1 million. And I joke, if the PowerPoint was any good, you get $2 million. And so that was just the thing everybody was doing, and there was a period, a specific window there for a couple of years where it didn't matter what your background was, it didn't matter what your age was. Everybody could hop on and be in a tech startup. So you had people that were walking out of banks and coming straight out of high school or whatever, just becoming internet startups. And so that was the environment we started. And like Anthony said, probably within about 6 months after we started, the entire thing just started falling apart. And so April 2000, the bubble burst. And then from there on, it became literally everywhere you looked around you, companies were just dying, shutting their doors one after the other. And the whole mentality had to change from, all right, we could raise a bunch of money and really grow this company, which is kind of the current environment, to you will never ever be able to raise money again in the history of Silicon Valley. So you have to take your startup cash, whatever you got, and be profitable with it. And that was literally sort of within the first 6 or 8 months of our company, the transformation.
I think the stat I saw was that unemployment in the Bay Area jumped in the tech industry was like less than 1%, and within 6 months jumped to over 18 during that period.
And what was the original goal of Red Octane? What did you guys set out to create at the beginning? You were several years away from the company then.
Yeah, so we originally started out as kind of Netflix for video games. So Netflix was the first to do this DVD rental by mail. And we had set out to do the same thing for video games before GameFly, before others. We launched our service, I think, 3 or 4 months after Netflix launched their service. And so we were the first to do that for video games quickly. By the time we raised some money from angels and the bubble burst, we realized that because Netflix had raised something like an order of 120 million, mostly to fund this enormous purchase of DVDs that they could ship to customers. And that wasn't possible, so we abandoned that and started moving into the first business we pivoted into was people were renting, at the time they were renting these Japanese video games, which you could play on your modded PlayStations, for those of you who remember those. So you could play Japanese, supposedly, right? You're playing pirated games, but you can play Japanese games. And so we figured out through that there was this popular series of music games in Asia that you couldn't get in the United States. And the most popular game at that time was Dance Dance Revolution. That was huge in Asia, but hadn't made its way to the US. And people were renting these games online from us, and they couldn't play with the dance pads. So they were emailing us asking, hey, can we get dance pads from you? And so our first decision at that point was, well, if they're asking us for dance pads, why don't we just sell them dance pads? It was a very simple sort of business decision. So we started selling dance pads. The dance pads we were selling were just utter garbage, and were breaking down. And so we decided, you know what, we could make better product than this. And we started designing our own dance pads. I packed my bags, flew out to China, figured out how they made dance pads. And then so we got into the business of making dance pads, and that was what kept us afloat for years. And we grew that business slowly, survived until 2004 when we, I guess one morning just realized, if Konami stopped making Dance Dance Revolution, we'd be out of business. So we decided, all right, well, we better get into the business of making software as well. And so we found some folks that had done an arcade dance game and partnered with them to make a PS2 version of that. And that was our first foray into video game publishing. And that was when we first learned about publishing games, especially music games, and tweaking the formula to make music games that were so enormously popular in Asia, but somehow hadn't caught on in the US. And the second game we made was Guitar Hero. And it was just sort of tweaking the formulas a little bit to try to find out how can you make this music game, which has at its core super fun play mechanics, how can you make it appeal to American and European audiences?
Sure.
And that took us all the way to 2005, and then kind of from there on, it just sort of exploded.
Sahil, tell us a little bit about your kind of, you're going to have to really remember a long time ago, I know.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about your kind of journey that made you and kind of the founding of Gumroad.
Well, back in '99, no, I'm kidding.
When you were in high school?
I was 7 years old. No, so I got started a lot more recently. I used to be a student at USC, and I was, my kind of claim to fame was making all these iPhone apps and blogging about them. And that got the attention of a bunch of startups, and I thought it would be a really good experience to see if I would, my kind of career path as I was thinking about it was probably join a company, join a small company, start my own company. And I didn't want to spend my career figuring that out if I knew that, starting a company wasn't something I wanted to do, so I wanted to get there as soon as possible. So I got that opportunity when Ben from Pinterest, who I actually saw today, funnily enough, reached out and said he liked all the work I'd been doing, design, mobile, all that fun stuff, and thought it would be cool if I worked on their app as well. So I did, and I flew up, I drove up to Berkeley for a USC football game, told him that I was in town for 2 days, hung out with him and his co-founder Paul. That meeting went pretty well, and then I started working with them full-time, like late 2010. And then I left USC, moved up to the Bay Area in January of last year, was there at Pinterest until August, left, did some contract work with Turntable, built their iPhone app, just because I thought they were going to be really big, still think they will be. And I just really wanted them to have a mobile app. And the best thing about being able to build stuff is you can just build the things you want. So I asked Billy and Seth if I could have their API and build their official app. So I did. I was basically in Singapore, where my family's based, for 2.5 weeks. So I was like, I'm just going to bang out the Turntable app while I'm there. So I did. And then I came back.
That was 2.5 weeks.
Yeah.
You can do a lot of shit in 2.5 weeks. No, I'm not getting a lot of stuff. 2.5 weeks times 7 days a week times 24 hours a day. It's a lot of time. Anyways, so I got back, I showed Billy and Seth the app. I was kind of nervous because I built this whole thing without them even looking at what I was doing. Luckily, they loved it, launched it the next month. And then I think like 3 days after that app launched, I was kind of free of commitments. So I started Gumroad September 29th. Raised a seed round from a bunch of investors, Max Levchin, Excel, Chris Soccer from Lowercase, people like that. Moved up to the city and then kind of hacked on it, tried to make it launchable. So did that until I think like February, launched the product in February, got a bunch of good buzz around it, started recruiting people. Now we're those guys as well, not just me.
So there's what, 5 of you, 6 of you?
6 total.
Okay.
Right? Something like that. So that went really well, raised a Series A from Mike Abbott at Kleiner Perkins, $7 million, and back to work, just cranking on product out of my living room for now.
Awesome.
Short story.
And just for those that don't know, just quickly describe what does Gumroad do?
Yeah.
And what's your core value proposition?
Yeah, so Gumroad is a tool that makes it as easy to sell stuff as it is to share stuff. So we want to take a lot of the dynamics that kind of started happening with social, like things are easier to share, everyone can do it, super fast, super simple, super easy, and bring all of that to selling stuff. So I had the idea when I wanted to sell a Photoshop icon to my Twitter followers, and I thought it couldn't have been that difficult. It's like sharing something except there's a price tag attached. Tried to sell it, found out it was actually really difficult, and decided to build Gumroad to kind of solve that problem for myself.
Yeah. And
then I realized like that problem is pretty applicable to almost any type of content. If I want to sell a video game design, a book, a chapter of a book, a video, anything, you have you're sharing a file with someone. There's just a price tag. So that's kind of that moment I decided to take it full time and turn it into a real company.
It'd be awesome to talk just a little bit about failures, and it'd be interesting, Sahil, to get your perspective as you guys have just started, and then we can jump to Anthony. But what are some of the things just in a company that's really only been around for 9 or 10 months or less? What are some of the things that you've learned in terms of failure? Have you guys failed at all? Have you gotten everything right?
Yeah, I think failure is a weird thing because as a startup, I think you start at 0.
Yeah.
So I think failure is not getting higher than 0 fast enough. So a lot of things look like failure that may not be failure because you have no idea what to compare it to. If something doesn't happen, you have no idea if something would have happened. Most recent failure is Wiz Khalifa actually used us to sell something and we went down for 10 minutes. That sucked.
That was when?
That was Thursday. You might be tweeting about us in an hour, so those guys are
ready to go.
A little jittery right now. But I don't know, failures I think they're hard to kind of detect in retrospect because they either work themselves out or you've learned from them and you don't really regret any of them.
Sure.
But yeah, I would say the biggest thing is just you believing in it and what you're building so much and trying to convince everyone else that they should too. It's probably the hardest thing.
Yep.
Whether that be investors or employees or users.
Anthony, tell us a little bit about DotSpotter and how you guys, where that ended up.
Well, I think we made a lot of mistakes along the way, but when we first started, the idea behind DotSpotter was back in '06, before actually smartphones came out or were popular. I should say before the iPhone came out, we had the idea for a mobile check-in app to allow you when you spotted celebrities. We thought it would be a lightweight type of thing. People would kind of sharing those photos. So we were thinking it would be like photos on a map. Think about Flickr on Google Maps inside your mobile phone. We launched. We spent about 2.5, 3 months building it, and then we launched it at Sundance in early '07. And after the first month, I think we had about 2 users on that platform. One of them.
Who was it? Yeah.
One of them was me. I don't know who it was. Yeah, probably the other one.
A bot somewhere.
Anyway, so but the other piece is it ended up because the team actually came from search. The news aggregation piece actually took off as well as parts of the community. So it was not what we kind of how intended the service to be, and obviously that was first big mistake that we had with that company. But luckily we were able to ride the wave and build a business around the things that people were using on the service.
And how did that is that evolve? What did it eventually evolve into to kind of get their attention?
It was a news aggregation site with a community before Facebook really was open for people to talk about different topics. I think ended up becoming a vertical news site for entertainment news, very much a la Dig, Make the New Gig, and it just caught the eye of CBS as well as Time Warner, and we had not raised a serious venture round yet. We raised a small seed, so. It kind of worked out for everyone involved. We ended up getting acquired in a year and a day.
Charles, tell us about some of the things that Red Octane went through. I mean, it's interesting that you had it feels like you whether you want to call it pivot or you guys found these different opportunities and you kept shifting into, like you said, the dance pads came along. Oh, we should start doing that. There's an opportunity there, and you kept moving. Did you guys struggle? Did you make mistakes? Tell us about it.
Yeah, so we were changing all the time because one of my friends gave us some advice when we started. He said the thing about starting a company is whatever you do, just don't let it die. Smart people will figure out a way to make something happen, but whatever you do, don't let your company die. And that's all we were trying to do during 2000, 2001 and 2. What Anthony was talking about earlier, the sort of unusual path, didn't realize how unusual until I started talking to VCs, because we didn't know any VCs back when we were doing Red Octane. But in the entire history of the company, we never raised a single penny from venture capitalists. And so I started asking some people that I had met along the way, some VCs. I said, this was after we sold to Activision. I said, are there other companies that you've seen in the last 5 or 10 years that were started by first-time entrepreneurs, never raised a single penny from VCs, and actually exited with, say, 100 million or more exit? And the only one that anybody ever came back with is that they thought VMware did it. But that's the only other company they'd ever seen. Obviously, VMware was much bigger than we were. But that was the only other company they said they may have seen that had gone through that. And that's when we started realizing how unusual that path was. And sometimes to startups, it seems like it's inconceivable that you would start a company, try to make it profitable, and just grow it over time. But we were doing that, and as a result, we had very little margin for error. So we were going literally for 2 years with less than probably a month of cash in the bank. Like every single payroll was a struggle to make the payroll, and then every single week we start with the management meeting. The first thing we look at is how much revenue did we do this week, because we have payroll coming up next week, and we have to make payroll.
And is this from the rental business, or is this from the accessories business?
This was for the rental business and all the way through the dance pads. Huh. The first game we did, to give you an idea of how we were struggling for 3 or 4 years, just grinding. We signed a deal to make that game. It was a port from the arcade game to PlayStation 2, and it was going to cost $250,000. And before we signed that, I was sitting there saying, where are we going to come up with $250,000? Because we had never had that kind of cash in the bank. And so it was like every single time cash went out, you were hoping, praying, like, oh, I hope enough cash comes in next week, like we could cover all this money. And we just did that for a year, month after month after month, year after year, 2 or 3 years. But the one thing it does for you is, I think as an entrepreneur, it gives you incredible clarity to where your business needs to go, because you don't have options, right? When you don't have options, sometimes it makes the decisions much easier. You know that I can only do things that'll be profitable. I can't do something because it'll generate great PR, great marketing, it'll attract a lot of users. You can only do things that can be profitable. And sometimes when you have to spend money, I liken it to, as an entrepreneur, when you go to the mall and you can only buy with cash, so whatever cash you got in your pockets, that's all you're buying. So if you had $100, you're not getting more than $100 worth of stuff. But when you have money, it's like shopping with a credit card. You see something you like, you just buy it. You see something you like, you buy it. And so when you're trying to survive month to month on just the cash that your business can generate, it gives you incredible clarity and focus on what products you should make, what you should charge for that. And so I always say that to this day, just from that experience, I think I understand businesses like Apple. They make a great product, they sell it at a high margin, and they're incredibly focused on that. It's much harder for me to understand a business like Twitter or Facebook. Not that they're not great businesses, but it's a different mentality. And so I say that only because I think as entrepreneurs, especially this generation, you a lot of people kind of throw out their examples like Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, which are all fabulous companies. But there are other ways to build companies that don't involve raising millions of dollars, that don't involve trying to build a product that gets great hype or gets a lot of users and then trying to figure out what to do with those users. That there is a way to build a company that sells products or services, that generates cash, and maintains that through the entire history of the company. So the one great thing, despite all the struggles about doing it that way, is you're beholden to nobody. So whatever we wanted to do, we just got in a room and we looked at each other and said, should we do this? And if we said yes, we did. And if we said no, we don't do it, right? You don't have to ask your board for permission to do anything. And that's the only way that a game like Guitar Hero would ever have gotten made. Because everybody else in the game industry, when we made that game, looked at us and said, you guys are crazy. That game would have never gotten greenlit at EA or Activision or any other game company. And it was only because we sat there, we could look at ourselves and say, look, do you want to do this? And if we believed in it and we worked out the numbers and said, I think we could at least break even, we could do it. So sometimes I think that the independence of owning, most of the company yourself and not being beholden to investors, outside investors, gives you freedom to innovate in ways that you can't otherwise.
Well, it feels like when companies start, but once you get out of our sphere here, I mean, the majority of companies are started the way that Red Octane was started, right? So-
Yeah, I'll give you one example. Some of you may not be familiar with this Korean gaming company called Nexon. So they went public, I think the same week as Zynga did, and both had about roughly the same market cap, sort of right in that 10 billion range. But the fascinating thing about Nexon was also doing about $1 billion a year in revenue. They were extremely profitable. They were making, I think, between 400 to 500 million a year in profit. But the thing that was fascinating about Nexon was Nexon was built, they grew from 0 to $1 billion over the course of, I think it was 14 years, where Zynga did it in 3 or 4. It was amazing. But the difference in those paths was, it was a fantastic outcome. For the founder of Zynga, Mark Pincus, right? I think he owned something like 18% or whatever the company. Nexon, the CEO of Nexon, owned 80% of his company when it went public, which is insane when you think about the fact he catapulted when it went public to like the second or third richest man in Korea, right? But behind the chairman of Samsung or something like that. And it was because he built his company profitably over the course of 14, 15, 16 years, right? And that kind of, I talk about clarity of sort of like mission for the company. That's a guy that was determined to build that into a gigantic gaming company and doing it profitably, and was never going to sell his shares to outside investors so he could control the vision of where that business was headed. And because he did it deliberately and slowly over time, he was able to own 80% of the company when it went public.
Awesome. Sahil, talk to us a little bit about, I think looking at a company like yours, a founder would say, my gosh, if I had $7 million in the bank, like an awesome team. I mean, some of them seem pretty awesome. Some of them are playing games over there, but checking making sure things aren't melting. Talk to us about what are the struggles that you guys go through. What a company that's young, that's getting a lot of great press, that's raised a lot of money. What kind of problems, what kind of struggles do you guys deal with on a daily basis or on a monthly basis?
Yeah. Well, I think it's just matching all of those expectations. I think from outside a company, everything always looks awesome until I think most, at least when I see companies, they look like they're going like this, and then they just die. And you're like, how the hell did that company die? It's going like that. It's like, well, because no one in the company wants to tell everyone that it's actually kind of going like that, right? So you have these weird things that happen.
Are you guys about to die?
No. I mean, we have so much money we can't die. No. I guess we could return.
Well, you did announce 50 mega parties the day after funding.
We got a tiger and a monkey. 2 clips. Harder than you think to get one. But I don't know. I think that right now the day-to-day struggles is just making sure that everything is worked out in a product, especially when you're dealing with people's money. You want to make sure that everything is pretty understandable, everything works the way people expect.
Yeah.
For me as a designer, it's like kind of balancing what I think is the right design or good design with what people expect. Like just the way stores have been built for a while. Like people expect a certain flow, a certain clunkiness almost that I don't really want designing. I think things should be, so it's balance. For me, it's balancing those two. There's all the scaling issues that happen when musically for users your site. But it's weird. It's like managing your own expectations too, because like if something like good happens, you don't want to be so emotionally engaged, because then if something bad happens, you're still engaged and you get kind of taken by shock. So I think the team makes jokes about how I'm so like I look like kind of I don't emote anymore. I just like and it's just because I'm emotional inside my head, but I want to try to make sure that.
How have you found, as you're managing, now I'm assuming for the first time, how are you finding, building this team, managing the team, and driving it? What are the challenges, or what are the things that you've learned?
I mean, the biggest thing is making sure everyone knows where the product should look like, how the product should look like, how the product currently looks, kind of the way we're going to get to that next point. So like, recently we try to like refocus our priorities around like speed, availability, and then last features, because people don't really care about new features if your site is slow or your site is down.
Yeah.
And I think as long as you have kind of almost these like product values that you can point to, the product should be fast, the product should be up, the product should do X, Y, Z, the product should be fun to use, should be low stress. Then when you think about features and like what you should work on, it's pretty clear like, oh, we should work on that because it will make our product faster or easier to use. And you're like, these are obvious, but a lot of the time they're not that obvious. They kind of get lost when you're busy doing so much shit and everyone's kind of scrambling and working on different things. That's probably the biggest challenge, is making sure that everyone knows where the priorities are. Sometimes you're so busy figuring out the priorities, you don't have time to tell anyone. I'm sure that happens to me all the time.
Yeah.
So I try to be as open and honest about everything. That helps. I think actually the openness is more important than the honesty. Is as long as like your data per se is what you're working on, what meetings you have lined up is available to people, then they can kind of proactively figure out like what I'm doing and what I'm not doing, where my priorities are, because it's hard for me to kind of recount every single thing that I do or I think about because it's millions of things a day.
Yeah. Yeah, Anthony, I'd love to get your perspective on, you up until a few years ago, before you left to start this company, you were running a massive division at CBS, and you decided to do another startup, to start all over again. Here we are. I don't know if you can get a shot of this office, Ben. Beautiful office, but you're in a small office in San Francisco, and you're starting over with a small team. Talk to us about what are some of the things that you're learning, or some of now doing it again. And coming back to the very, very early stages of the startup, what's that been like?
I think that I had to go through actually a culture shock coming back, to tell you the truth, having run an organization with hundreds of people for about 3 years. In fact, when we first were starting, my co-founders Joan and Eric, we would be whiteboarding stuff out. And in my head, my muscle, my reaction was always, okay, who am I going to delegate this to? And then I realized that person was always me. And that type of shock, I think,
is that true? Can you confirm that he actually did do it?
He made a comment this morning that he wished he had his admin back. So.
He wished he had his
Admin back.
But that muscle was not developed or exercised for about 3 years. I think that was the biggest shock. And then also the other thing is, having been on the other side of running a large org and going through the process of looking at startups to acquire, you start looking at things differently, especially when you realize that, look, everyone, as was mentioned earlier, everyone talks about the company going this way. You kind of know where the warts are. And in some respects, when you start a company for the third time, I think that because you know what can go wrong, in some respects, initially, you have to suspend your disbelief, because the main reason we're doing this is because there is a huge opportunity, but you have to kind of believe why a small company can actually achieve greatness in terms of how big the opportunity, how you can take advantage of this huge opportunity. And so I think that, running a company today, the third time versus the first time, we're completely different from that standpoint.
What is success for you guys? What is as you think about every morning, as what is what does long-term success look like for your company today? What does that mean for you?
Well, I think that the reason we're doing this is to create value for ourselves and our shareholders first. So hopefully, if we look out at 5 years, there's going to be a nice financial outcome for everyone. I think the second part of this is that hopefully we'll build a business that's durable, that's going to be around. My first two businesses, there's parts of me that think we sold out a little early. And then the third part, honestly, it's hard for me to say what that really looks like just yet, because we're really still in the process of trying to figure out what we want to be when we grow up. So our situation this time was a little different than the others from that perspective, where we're not focused on an initial goal. We actually started the company experimenting a little bit more before we started running.
Sahil, how about you? What does success look like for Gumroad?
Yeah. Well, one comment on the last thing is I actually have the opposite reaction, which is like I'm almost afraid to delegate things. I'm so used to building everything myself, and I'm like, how do I do this? And I'm like, wait a second, I have people here to delegate.
You have people now.
It's weird, but it's good. It's good. I've gotten better at it. But what was your question? It was something about success. I try not to think about it too much, because it's going to happen regardless of what I think is going to happen. But I think it's just continuing to be independent, trying to build a sustainable product that aligns the business model and the product quality. I joked, didn't really joke actually, but I told Mike Abbott, who's on my board now, last week, he's like, what do you want to do? Like, I want to buy Amazon. So I think that's a good goal. I'm not joking. I want to buy Amazon. That's one of the goals, or one of the goals I have for Gumroad.
And would Jeff report into you, or would he how that? Haven't gotten that far.
I haven't really thought about it more than I think there's a lot of similarities between the two companies that would benefit each other a lot.
Yeah.
Would you delegate to Jeff?
I would try. I would be able to do that. I have no idea how the reporting structure would work. Actually, it's interesting. Maybe he could take over, or give me an intern. We'll see. But yeah, no, I don't know.
That's a huge goal.
But yeah, definitely be independent for as long as possible. I think what we want to do, it requires that. We don't. When we talk to a lot of people, like a lot of the product, like you kind of almost like fight against yourself because you have this like walled garden a lot of the time. Like a lot of the way people get to scale, they build some marketplace, some ecosystem, and then they protect that by making their product worse for people that are outside of it. So Amazon Payments is a great example. So is Apple by now. iTunes Connect using sites literally like a client that Apple owns.
Yeah.
So I think if we could build something without that, it would be really massive. But to do that, we have to be independent. We can't be aligned with Facebook or Twitter or Google or whoever else is a typical acquirer these days. But the other thing is I want to see if I can build a really good company. And you can't really do that if you get bought for $20 million. It's not fun. It's boring.
Charles, how about you tell us, and then we'll wrap up. Tell everyone what you're working on at the moment, and with the massive success that you've had with Guitar Hero, what does success look like for you in your latest endeavor?
Yeah. So on the first question, what we're working on. So my brother and I started two companies. The first one is the goal of that sort of mission is to make the world healthier through video games. And so it's games that you use, when you exercise, games that have to do with wellness. So kind of like we envision what We Fit would be in this day and age, and we started making games like that. And that one's sort of a mission, which is literally, we want to make the world healthier through video games. And so the success for that would be measured in the impact it has on problems like child obesity. And rates of diabetes and things like that. Obviously we're not going to move the needle on those up by ourselves, but I think part of the issue for everybody that is in that industry is that generally video games get blamed for things like child obesity, and to me it's just a medium. It's like television. It's like books. It's not in and of itself good or evil. It's what you do with the medium. You can use it to do good, or you can use it to do evil things. And so we wanted to use it to do good. And so the second time around when we envisioned success, it's kind of funny because a lot of VCs, we'll talk about they like to invest in people with a track record. And what I've learned is there are classic sort of first-time entrepreneur mistakes, and then there are classic second-time entrepreneur mistakes, right? You don't make the same mistakes, but you make just as many the second time around as you do the first time. And so, trying to adjust to this life as a second-time entrepreneur and figuring out the problems and, going through the first complete cycle of a company that just goes for years in obscurity and nobody cares about to, I remember the first day after Guitar Hero released, the second morning, somebody stole the sign in front of our company. And I was thinking, who the hell would steal our sign? And then we realized it was some fanboy that came on. And that taking off and becoming the best-selling game in the world for 2 years, 2007 and 2008, it peaked out. Guitar Hero sales in our business peaked out at 1.5 billion a year for 2008. To the complete opposite spectrum where it started to decline. So we went 3 years in a row, 1.1 billion, 1.5 billion, back down to 1 billion. And the second time around, somehow we had lost like $300 million in profits when we hit the second billion. The second time we did $1 billion, to where Activision was already beginning the process of shutting it all down. and we were laying off people, and now the only group that remains from that was the hardware group. So you're going through that entire cycle and seeing, essentially this company go from nothing and struggling for years to becoming one of the biggest, running one of the biggest video game franchises on the planet, to eventually winding almost all of it down. I think that experience sort of gives you a different perspective on what success is. I think when you get through the process, if you've ever been to a company and you've seen massive layoffs, I think success for me longer term is, you keep people whose families depend on this job and are proud and happy to be working. You want to keep that going. It's not sort of a finite thing where we are together and then the company is sold and then people get disbanded. Like once you've been through that process, you realize how great the experience is with all the people that you've been working with for years. Like some of you guys, if you haven't been through this a few times, you go through this experience and the people aren't there forever. And but if you build the company right and it has sustainability, you can last forever. When I talk to my friends at Blizzard, when they founded Blizzard, those guys, they've been there, some of them 18, 20 years running that company, right? Which is almost unheard of in the video game industry. And those are the kinds of things that I consider a true success. It's not only were they able to create, probably in my opinion, the best video game developer on the planet, but they've been able to keep the core team together. I think of the core team, the guy that's been there the shortest amount of time has been there 12 years, like the core management team.
Wow.
Able to keep a team like that together and grow a company, I think is an amazing sort of tribute and measure of success.
Let's give these guys a big round of applause. Questions? Does anyone have any questions for these guys? Don? If you want to, whoever answers it.
Sure.
Repeat the question.
One of my buddies, Mark Johnson, was hired on at Red Octane on
yes.
the hardware team. And he told a really funny story about how he was hired. And I'm really curious, is there a core vision that you have for hiring and what that is and the lengths you go to find the right people?
Yeah, so Mark, we actually found him at an arcade playing a dance game. We thought, this guy's really good. Let's try to hire him. And we did. So he was just playing at Sunnyvale Golfland, playing Dance Dance Revolution at Sunnyvale Golfland. That's how he got a job with us. And he became a tester. He had a funny line about being a tester. He said, people think it's really cool that I get to play video games for a living. And I tell him, no, I get to play one video game for a living. Every day he plays one video game. But I think the thing that was interesting about video games, that we always had comments from people in other industries, was how come you can get away with paying an equivalent person, whatever it is, C++ programmer, Java programmer, you can get away with paying that person with equivalent experience less money than they would if they were working at whatever, Microsoft or Oracle or Google. And the thing I always say is, because some people, not everybody, some people grow up dreaming of making video games. You don't grow up dreaming of being a database developer, right? But you grow up dreaming of making video games. And that by itself attracts a certain type of person. And so as our philosophy was, we never tried to recruit what we thought were star resumes, people from the right colleges and the right, in fact, it was better if we didn't recruit. It was better if they wanted to work with us. And even if they were less qualified than somebody else, the fact that they wanted to work with us, we felt like the passion for the product was more important than their technical skills or their educational background. And so we had a collection of sort of misfits. As an example, 5 years into the history of our company, we didn't have anybody that had ever worked at another video game company. And it was crazy. We had 30 some odd people. None of them had ever worked a single day at any video game company. And we were trying to make video games. So the first time around, the first time around, there's sort of, I think, a lot of the times the mistakes were more on the side of trying to do things that we thought on paper made sense, right? So I'll give you an example. Like, we always wanted to do a deal with EA or Activision or whatever. And then, we didn't realize at the time that, I think in most cases, Anthony's been to big and small companies. Big companies like to work with big companies, and small companies like to work with small companies. And sometimes even if you get a deal done with EA, or Activision, like the small company working with a big company, there could be just an enormous misfit, even though you think that works. So like culturally, and in terms of like just a lot of things that have to do with EQ, like the people there are not behaving the same way that people at startups do, that you have this idea that, hey, we want to do a deal with Facebook, we want to do a deal with Apple, we want to do a deal with Google. But sometimes it's not good for your company, that even though it doesn't look as good to potential investors or to the press, that you're better off working with people that you can do things with, as opposed to things that you think are sort of landmark deals. Second time around mistakes, I think, a friend of mine who founded a company called Leapfrog, they made a product called LeapPad years ago. I was chatting with him, and he had some interesting advice before we started the second time around. So he said a couple of interesting things. One is you have to do something that you feel personally passionate about, because it's too easy to get distracted by other things, like traveling, spending time with your family, philanthropy, whatever it is, right? It's too easy to get distracted, so you have to do something which, even if you've never made a penny, you would show up and work long hours for. And then the other thing he said that was interesting was, he said that you have to realize that you're signing up for startup number 2 and 3. Because if 2 fails, you're going to have to do 3 just to prove number 1 wasn't a fluke. Right? And so I think a lot of the times, the second time around, there's this sense of like invincibility, and that you can do things. And a lot of times we have to check ourselves that, is this person telling us this is a great idea because of something we did in the past, or are they telling us this is a great idea because of this idea? Right? And people just automatically sort of assume that, oh yeah, well they made that, so they're going to make another good product, which is not always the case. And that those are the type of second time entrepreneur mistakes. Is like, you think this is a great product, you think, oh man, I'm doing this great because everybody in the world is telling me this is a fantastic product, but they're telling it to you because they're assuming that, well, you made a great product before, you're going to make a great product again. And they're not telling you the truth, which is, I think this product really sucks. They just assume you must know more than I do. So I think there's a lot of dangers the second time around that in things like that.
Anybody else?
And feel free to hang out if you guys want. We have drinks in the back as well, so I think some more food. And thanks for coming.